We'll call to order the Planning Commission meeting. The date today is November 2nd, 2022. The time is 6:30. And we're going to call the meeting to order. And the first thing on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The third item on the agenda is approval of tonight's meetings agenda. Anybody want to make a motion?
Yeah, this is Chris. I'll make a motion to approve the amended Planning Commission agenda.
This is Barb Bowick. I'll second that.
Any discussion? Hearing none. We'll call for a vote. Chris?
Chris, aye.
Ron, aye.
Barb, aye.
As you can see on the agenda, item number 4 was crossed out. Item number 5 is discussion, ordinance 22-01, commercial design standards, pages 1 through 5-8, handout and enclosures. So I guess we go to you, Frank.
All right. All right. Yeah. So, it should be in presentations, and then the handout. Perfect. All right. So this is obviously going to look quite familiar to people that were at the last meeting for the joint City Council and Planning Commission, but with some changes here and there. So if we could go to the next slide. I won't rehash too much from the joint meeting 2 weeks ago, but today, after our last meeting, we're just refining a few points. So if my draft ordinance amendment is accepted, it can be used as a Planning Commission recommendation to the City Council. And if we want to go to the next slide. So I'll be going through these a little quickly, Elizabeth, but so just big things we looked at over the last few months, building materials, staff amendment, there were some staff amendment questions and other design standards. Then if we go to the next slide, we can see that we've gotten through quite a bit after the last meeting. So some of the important changes is now we're going to be switching building materials to classes to help clarify the language in the ordinance. There was going to be some revisions to lighting and illumination in our ordinance. And then there's a very short addition to fences from what I wrote last time. And we won't worry about other parts that we discussed previously because I know you all have been doing it quite more than I have, so I'm sure this is kind of an old hat. So we'll go ahead, go to building materials on the next slide. This one's going to probably be the heaviest one. So I've completely reformatted in all freeway districts, except I more tweaked the light industrial. I didn't reformat light industrial into classes in the same way, just because that's at 30% of what we would call what used to be kind of the masonry standards, but now is going to be class 1. So at 30%, there wasn't quite the need for that. It was, but I did change some of the wording, and just to more align with what's going to be in the rest of the ordinance now. So basically, what I did is I created 4 material classes. If you see on the right there, I based class 1 on existing masonry products. I based class 2 on some materials we discussed, and kind of some glass materials. Sorry, by materials we've discussed, I'm kind of talking about like the fiber cement, the veneer siding. I base Class 3 mostly on existing accent materials, and then Class 4 is more what I saw listed on other cities and what's considered their lowest class of materials. And the percentages are based on existing masonry requirements for Class 1. Class 2, Class 3, that's generally what the remainder is. I tried to keep Class 4 lower than Class 2, Class 3. I would actually recommend merging what I have written down as Class 2 and Class 3. I only kept them separate for this just because there was some differences in where it kind of came from in this whole entire process. Like I was saying, the Class 2 is more based on like kind of fiber cement, the veneer sidings, that sort of stuff, and then Class 3 on accent materials. And that's kind of up to the Planning Commission for tonight. So if there's any discussion that we want to have on that, I'm open to that, and then we can move on to the next few slides. And you'll see an example of the language that I used on pages 1 and 2, but this is going to repeat throughout the in the draft ordinance in the other freeway districts besides light industrial, like I said.
Excuse me, Frank, did you say you recommend merging classes 3 and 4?
I'm sorry. I recommend merging classes 2 and 3.
2 and 3, okay.
Yep, that's correct. But I'm open to other changes, suggestions.
Because right now, this is Chris, you have 30% Class 2 or Class 3, which if the 30% is either or, then,
Which is why I do recommend merging
I
them.
mean, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, but I wanted to keep it separate for now, just in case, because right from where we've come from to now, they both kind of came from different places, but we can discuss if there's other changes. But yeah, it's kind of the same anyway. So, and what I based it on was also a lot of these other cities have 4 classes, some of them have 3, so I just kind of wanted to keep that option open.
This is Ron. When you cut these classes down, it's better for the applicant then, right? Somebody looking at it, thinking of coming in here, that, would that be correct? Am I on the right page?
It presents greater flexibility, you know what I mean? Because they're not locked into a smaller set of one type of material.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I also think it might help create some clarity as well, so.
So, Frank, what, are you looking from us to give its blessing, or?
Yeah, I
Or
mean,
on a merger?
if there's any questions, or, I mean, yes, you'd have to technically amend this to merge them together. But I just wanted, I don't know if there's any discussion that you want, or just if you have any questions of me. I think we've all been through this quite a bit, so I don't know if there's too much left to discuss.
So this is Chris again. I know before we had 70% of the facade which is more or less a covering. And now we're back to 70% of the Class 1, which is more of a masonry type product. And again, Love's and Caribou would not have qualified with this. So really the question is that where you want to go,
Exactly.
Sure.
right?
Sure, and if we,
That would
if we
be
want
yes.
to go towards facade, we can do that.
So let's go back to Hy-Vee. Is that we already looked at that place.
Correct, and that wouldn't have qualified, that would not have been
Well-
approved under this ordinance, because again, that was not 70% masonry under these type of classes, so, yes.
Yeah, Hy-Vee was 50% masonry, and then they had 50% ceramic bamboo and some other material. And because of the PUD, they were allowed to vary the percentages, but it was a higher percentage of other materials. So in this particular case, if you would have applied like today's standards, under the PUD, it would have been, they would have met, instead of 70, it would have been 50. And so they would have asked for a larger percentage of the other percentage, and you probably would have granted it because it actually looked, the way that they had designed it, it was a nice design.
Yeah.
And that was all four sides.
Okay. I have another question about Hy-Vee. So I know that was a couple of years ago or whatever, but is that still, how do I want to say, we approved that building, correct?
All approvals are gone now.
Okay.
There is no, they kind of like ran out, you know what I mean? Like they ran out of time kind of thing. So they will have to come back in order to build. So yeah, there's things that they will need to do. And I think from a city staff perspective, in the developers agreement, had we known, you know what I mean, what was going to happen, we probably would have put in the developers agreement, like, if you're not going to build in 5 years, then you have to turn it back, or, you know what I mean? There would have been something built in, because this is the best corner we have, and nothing is going on. So I think we would have probably done a little bit different, but we really thought they were going to build that year.
And this is Chris again, when Hy-Vee put in their application, that was before we were done.
It was before we were done, before the bridge was done. They kept saying, as soon as the bridge went in, they were going to start building, and then everything kind of, I won't say fell apart, but they kept saying, we'll tell you when we're ready. And now we're in building season 2023, and we're still waiting.
So when you go back to square one, I mean, they have to, the whole layout from square one.
New application.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
where that building sits, how it sits, and, okay.
And I'm sure they probably have a new model, you know what I mean? Because everything they designed was pre-COVID, and they have changed their format and floor plans. I mean, just if you look at other stores.
Yeah, okay.
This
Thank you.
This is Barb. Will, in the future then, will we be putting in time? And they'll know that ahead of time, and that's something you and the council and the lawyer will decide,
Yes.
correct?
It will protect the city.
Okay.
So this is Frank. I did, just to an earlier question, I did realize that there is in here about building facade more towards the end of this, I don't know quite how to, the second point, so after class 4, then it starts with number 2. It's not in the part that I amended, but in the original, it is in there, so if we do want to, I just want to make sure if we want to stick more with the facade, this being a facade requirement, or if we want to make this kind of an overall thing, but it was actually my intention that this was a facade thing, and I can add something to clarify maybe a little bit more towards the start of it too, that it's a facade. requirement.
One question that came up was taxes and buildings built out of masonry or buildings built, say the way Love's was built with the facade. Did we come to any determination on, is there a greater tax base when it is an all-concrete building compared to a building that uses some of these other materials? Say if it is a facade with the price of the materials. I mean, am I making sense?
Certainly with the building permit, it makes a difference. You know, if you have an all masonry building, it goes on value, and then there's a chart, and when it's made out of masonry, it's a higher per square foot. I made a note to ask Alex, you know what I mean, across the board, just generally, because a lot of what Councilman Bush was saying was there's an awful lot of shopping centers that are built this way now. So I'm just curious now at a convenience and or retail sales, because they tend to blend the square foot prices and so, or yeah, the per square foot valuations. I'm just wondering now how they're doing that, whether they have different classes for that. So I wrote down, I'm going to call Alex to find out how they're doing that now that you have the two types of buildings in what I would call the commercial retail.
Because I know, you know, I've watched the couple different strip malls, I'll call them strip malls, go up in Woodbury. And when you look at them, they're steel frame, and then they look like there's, you know, stone and brick and all this, which they look very nice. But you do see a lot of them that are being built that way. And my question comes back that if we are saying 70% masonry and it's truly masonry, are we limiting the availability to build up there? So far, we've let 2 places in and almost 3 that don't meet that requirement. And I know watching in Hugo where they built the new Caribou and in that, you know, it's the same type of construction.
Yeah, I think, you know, a commercial builder is generally going to want to go for cheaper material if possible, but, you know, there's other factors as well. You know, this is a great location, but at this, you know, I'm just kind of saying there is a balance between the two. So I think there is a chance that we might get locked in a little bit if we become too strict. I've kind of talked to Dean about this, our city planner. I don't want to speak for him, but I think there's definitely, we want to be careful about going too over the top and becoming too restrictive. So,
And with your conversation with Dean, the 70% masonry is not going over the top.
I was thinking more of the facade,
Okay.
70% of the facade. And again, I might want to add some language in here to clarify it a little bit more. It does kind of pop up at the end, but it probably should be a little bit more in the lead-off section.
Okay, so am I the only one confused here?
Yep. Frank, could you give us some examples of how the two alternatives play out in a practical building?
I'm sorry, like, how do you mean?
So can you tell us how, based on the policy questions you're asking the Planning Commission, how these buildings would be built? So if they choose a 70% rule, what would 70% masonry versus 70% masonry facade, the two proposals that you have before them, how does that change how the building gets built out?
You know, I'll be honest here, because I don't want to give the planning commission bad advice. I'm not as much of a building materials person, so I think kind of the basic, and Elizabeth, you might be able to help me a little bit here too, is the structure itself will have, won't be masonry. But
But these,
the,
class 1 is masonry.
yes, and if we decide facade,
Okay.
that would mean it's kind of like the outside. It's different from like hardy or fiber cement hardy board sort of stuff where it's just stuck on, but that would kind of be the basic difference. Elizabeth, if you have a little bit more knowledge on this.
Yeah, I think what we're deciding now is of the 70%, do you want true masonry, brick and mortar, or will you allow veneer? And if you allow veneer, then, and that's fine, but understand it'll be a steel, you know what I mean, steel type construction, and as Councilman Bush indicated, they adhere to steel beams and such, which in today's market, you know, maybe that's, you know what I mean, that's the way they're going. Obviously, construction materials are quite spendy. So in class 1, if you want that flexibility, then you would say it has to be 70% either brick and mortar, or you will allow veneer, and you can say, you know, up to, you know, 50% of the 70% can be veneer. I don't know, whatever combination you want to do that. And then again, the class 2 and 3 can be the other mix of the 30%. Will it, I'm trying to think of, you know, no matter what developer comes in, developers are always looking at the bottom dollar.
Right.
You know what I mean? They all are. I mean, there's not one of them that's not. And so it's just, at this point, I think you've seen, you know, both types of buildings, and you know, you might want to say in a convenience area, you'll do this, but in the area, if you're going to allow the larger warehouse type uses, maybe, you know, maybe, you know, tip-up panels is the right way to go, because that's a cheaper, you know what I mean, way to go. I don't know. It's hard to say because the industry is changing so much, and the expensive materials is hard.
Excuse me, but you don't know what the difference in the tax base, excuse me, between the masonry and the 70% masonry facade? You have no idea how it changes?
We didn't do a study of, you know what I mean, dollar for dollar, you know what I mean, what it would be in the CR district.
What do you think, guys? I mean, we don't really want, I mean, the tax base is important to Columbus.
Well, I think the tax base is important, but I also think we don't want to scare people away either. I mean,
It's that balance, right?
It is
Because even
balance.
even in the apartment building, you know, they told us they weren't going to build 100% masonry, we weren't going to get one. So I think there's a cross between the lines of where expense and what's feasible. And I don't, you know, it's changed over the past 2 years.
so are most cities 70%, or did they go into these classes, Frank, or?
These are a bit more. These I got from, this tends to come from a lot of like more kind of gateway districts, highway districts, like the districts that a lot of cities want to like wow people with. I like a lot of this is from Woodbury. I did, like I said, I changed the order. This is, because this is more based on our code. It's just changing it more to the class structure as opposed to this, use this of this much, like for masonry, and then these are acceptable materials, and then this isn't acceptable. This is changing that. So it's more similar actually to our code as it exists than a complete revision. So like I said, I've found similar things and a lot of like, I'm trying to think, because I keep going back to Woodbury because that's where I last lived, but like, they kind of have some gateway districts by, where their freeways are kind of bordering the city. And other cities have kind of, have done that too, that I studied. What was it, might have been Blaine, but, that's kind of more where this comes from.
And if you were wondering how the percentage compares to other cities, Woodbury, it's between 50 and 65% for class, they do class ABC like this. So they do 50 to 65% class one. And for theirs, it's just, they call it exterior architecture. So for theirs, it isn't how the building is built, it's the outside.
So they classified it as exterior architecture, and the class
phase.
of materials that falls under that is what?
They do like class A, class B,
Okay.
class C.
So
one is?
what are the materials that they're listing?
Which district are you looking at?
And I'm thinking more where like they built the Costco over there, they have on the other side where they're building all the medical places and the strip malls, and they have the existing is what I've seen go up lately. So I'm kind of just curious, if you say they have a percentage of, what'd you say, 65 or?
Yeah, and for theirs, it's different between different districts and types of buildings. Their class one is conventional brick or natural or cultured stone or glass or copper. They have offices, places of worship, schools, and commercial buildings. Must use at least 3 class 1 materials and must be composed of at least 65% class 1 materials. It is different for different districts, 65 for industrial and warehouse, and for non-residential structure.
Yeah, Woodbury does do it more, at least with some of these classes, in terms of uses, than
Districts.
districts, but
Yeah.
yeah, but it's also different between each district too. So it's a big city with a lot of different stuff.
Right.
So, and again, for me, I kind of took that just basic language, like that's where the wording comes from. If you were to probably read that over, you'd see a lot of the same wording. Like I know. That's kind of why I wanted conventional brick as opposed to like a thin brick veneer siding or a fiber cement exterior siding, just so we kind of had that difference clarified as well.
So really, the question is pure masonry or veneer,
All right.
masonry products.
Yeah, our current ones for commercial are 80% and 70%. That isn't that far off of what Woodbury is even. 65% as opposed to 70%.
And again, the percentages in here are based off of what we currently have for masonry for, that's what class 1 basically is, so.
Well, I guess we're looking at numbers. And that's about it. And whatever we recommend to the city council, they could change that number too, couldn't they?
As far as I'm aware, that is correct. They can.
So if we were to
suppose
say
amend.
65% or something, they could raise it to 70, or we said 70, they could bring it down to 65.
And when you say that, you're speaking of total masonry. I mean, it's not a veneer, it's
Yeah,
full
that's- Yeah,
masonry.
it's masonry. And I guess we got, probably looking way out in the future, but I'm not a contractor or a developer, but what turns them off? in other words, we don't want to go there, and I don't know where that number is. And
No, and we also don't want, and I agree that contractors will come in, and we've seen it with the first apartment building, and they'll want to give you nothing. And
Slam something.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So we don't want to go down that route either.
Well, if you look at the commercial uses, the conditional uses, most of these things are not that large, except the hotel or the the restaurants, they don't build those huge anymore, and they're not building large retail buildings anymore. All of these are relatively, could exist in, like what they just built at Hugo, the 3 stores, side by sides, Caribou, and I think one's going to be a tobacco shop, and I don't know what the third is going to be. That seems to be the trend of what they're doing for retail, doesn't it?
it sure looks that way down there. I agree with you on that part. Hugo,
All of these would work for that, except well, it says small fitness center, dry cleaner, hair salon. None of those need to be large.
I don't know if when we look at the northeast quadrant up there with the Hy-Vee in that, I don't know why I just didn't picture this 4 years ago or, 3 years ago. I thought they'd be more
Bigger?
bigger.
Well,
I
yeah,
know.
we're seeing that.
And now I'm looking at it thinking, I look at Hugo there where Caribou Coffee is, and to me, it's a small little strip mall. It isn't, but it gives it appearance and I thought down by Hy-Vee, it would be kind of packed in.
Well, I was actually kind of surprised by Love's. For some reason, I thought it was going to be bigger, the actual building part of it. But, it's plenty big, but when I look at the Hardee's,
Don't forget to speak in the microphone.
when I look at the Hardee's and I look at the restaurant, they're kind of like mini restaurants, whereas in my mind, I was picturing a full restaurant.
Yeah, I look at it sometimes and I know it's tall and big, but you look at Eco Fund or you look at Viking and you put them up in the northeast quadrant up there. Kind of not retail, but whatever it is, entertainment.
Oh, it is retail.
Yeah, yeah,
Eco Fund is retail.
It just looks like you're using more space in a
Yep.
smaller area. And the minute
And
you
those
start-
are concrete buildings.
Yeah, and now all of a sudden we're
Hip-ups, yeah.
stretching this thing
Yeah.
out.
So, can you think of a building in Lino Lakes that's all block versus a veneer building? I can look it up, like the Holiday Station on Lake Drive.
Elizabeth, microphone.
So if you can think of a building, I can look it up real quick, of an all, masonry building in Lino Lakes, just to give you an idea of value versus another building. I can't think of an all masonry building versus not. So I brought up the Holiday Store. So the Holiday Store on Lake Drive, which is at 7509 Lake Drive, is $367,300 is the market value for the building.
What about the in Lino, the Bill's Superette and the liquor store next to that?
Okay, so hang on a second.
'Cause
And I
that's,
don't know how they were built. I don't know if they're a veneer or if they're masonry.
they look like they're masonry.
The liquor store does.
Yeah.
I couldn't.
Yeah, I'm not positive.
Bill's is a lot of glass in the front.
I know you're in deep thought there, Elizabeth, looking, but that
That's
300,
it's on Main Street, right? It's on Main Street.
At the intersection of Main and Lake.
I thought the Bills was at,
You're talking about at the corner of Lake and Main Street,
Right, Bill's
Yeah.
Superette and,
this is Main Street.
and the Good Willie or whatever, liquor.
Goodwill.
You're right.
Goodwill.
Good
I mean,
Willie.
Goodwill. Oh, Gee Willikers, that's
Gee
what it
Willikers.
is. Got me in a Goodwill.
But I mean, those are nice sized buildings.
Idle Lakes.
Yes.
I didn't catch that part about Holiday Station being valued at 300 and some odd thousand, just the building?
Yep, 367 just for the building.
So the land is extra.
Yeah, the land, and I wasn't gonna mix it up with land value because that depends on how much acreage it is. So that would be hard, but a lot of times you can compare buildings to, buildings to buildings. I'm not sure where I can't find the,
You're almost right on it.
I think this is it now.
I think that's the other gas station kitty corner to it. Because you're
No,
looking for
there's,
the one
yep, there's, yep.
you're looking for the one that's south of the bar?
No, that's a different one.
No, it would be
It's on the east,
Okay, then you are on.
northeast corner.
Yeah, that's what I kind of thought.
I always get those two confused. I just know it as the morning one or the evening one because it's the way I go.
$862,100
For the G. Willikers or the,
for the Bills Superette.
oh, that's quite a difference.
It's a lot bigger store, though. I mean, it's a bigger facility than what the Holiday is. And it's newer. I mean, that's a big key part is the expense to build something today versus when Holiday was built is quite a bit different.
Nearly double.
But you
Yeah.
can see the difference in the price of the value of the property would bring more tax base.
So property values ultimately result from the county assessor and their work. And so property value in the state of Minnesota is pretty simple. It's the estimated market value of the property and the use multiplied by your tax levy. And so depending upon the market value that's determined by the assessor, based again upon the use, that's where you get your aggregate value. So you could have a tip-up concrete panel building that provides warehousing services that's in a high-demand area that is valued, that may have been less to build, but has significant market value associated with it. Just like a 3,000 square foot house in one municipality may be differently valued than 3,000 square feet in another municipality. And so market forces do drive, market impacts do drive how a property is valued. Initial construction costs show up in your building permit fees, certainly, and they can likely continue to show up in your tax value, but they're not solely determinative, if that's helpful.
Well, let's get back to square one.
Right.
So all bricks or pretend bricks?
Yep,
That's
that's
the
really what it
question.
comes down to.
So I'm now on Apollo Drive, and I don't, I'll look to see how, apparently those are condos, so they are individually owned, and most of those buildings are over $1 million, they're 1.7. Estimated market value just on the building. Because they're condos, they actually own just the building.
So, commissioners, where do we want to go?
Well, do we want to leave the, do we want to leave the 80% of class 1 for commercial, community commercial?
80%.
Yeah, for community commercial
Okay.
on page 6 and
Yeah.
7.
They're all different because they're all based on whatever it currently is, so.
Yeah. And the general commercial would be 70%. He's got this all figured out, and then at the end, he adds the percentage. Is that correct?
Yep, that's how I structured all of this. It's similar to what Woodbury has, and again, The light industrial district, just because it was only at 30% right now, I just changed to the wording just to class 1 and then made it so some of our more, what we kind of say, the remaining combination of materials I listed as class 4 as opposed to, just to kind of clarify.
And, excuse me, you listed the class of materials first and the percentages second, whereas before it was the percentages first. and
Yep,
then-
yep,
Is that correct?
yep. That's for all the ones that I did change. That's how it's structured now.
Kind of makes it easier, don't you think?
I thought it did in the beginning, but then we started talking.
And then you got more confused.
And then I get more confused. So tell me, Frank, are we going to move class 2 and 3 together? Is that the goal here? I mean,
It's
I mean,
30% of a combined.
yeah,
Why
we
have them
can.
separate?
I know there was some talk about this might get changed by the city council too, so we can always defer it to them if you prefer. My recommendation is that ultimately should be merged, but I can always kind of have that in my back pocket if we go to the city council. So, sorry, I'm not being very helpful right now with the answer, but I just want to make sure all options or the options are available for you.
Well, I mean, this, Chris, I just say with 30% being either 2 or 3,
Yeah,
what's the point?
let's
right.
make it simple.
Yes, yeah, I
Okay, we
mean,
agree with that. Let's merge those.
yes.
All right, so we're gonna merge class 2 and 3, and then what we are talking about, so the percentages, that is facade, or is that overall building? Because right now I do kind of have facade in here, but it could be more clarified, so if you want to give me direction to put better clarification for facade or to take it out, that would be helpful, and then I think we can move on.
Okay, would you just point out to me where, like on the first and the mixed-use medium density, where do you call it out as facade?
So that is on page 2.
Yep.
Point 2, so after class 4, last sentence I do,
Okay, I see it.
yeah,
Okay,
which it doesn't stick out because it wasn't changed, that was already there. So the wording could be clearer if I were to lead off with it, which is probably something I should have done.
yes, yeah, no, we should. So what do you guys think about facade or masonry?
Well,
Total masonry for the percentages of the class 1?
well, excuse me, they're different for each district.
Well, the percentages are, but the classes are still, do we want it with a higher percentage when he's talking the class 1 material, right? Do we want that as a facade, which would be a veneer, or do we want it total masonry?
Well, for community, commercial on page 8, it says buildings shall incorporate classes of materials in the following manner, at least 80% class 1. So that's different than what it is for general commercial, because that's 70%.
Correct, but the class 1 materials are the same.
Yeah,
So it comes back to, do we want facade or do we want total masonry?
And the masonry is going to be the most expensive,
right.
correct?
Yes,
But it's
should be.
also, you recall that Bill, God, I can't think of his name right now. Our lawyer, he
Bill
said
Griff.
that it's important to have brick buildings because of the longevity of the building and the value. So I don't think we should
So then we don't want facade in
No.
the wording, would be what it comes down to. If we agree with that, then we need to remove facade.
Well, do you remember him saying that? I do. He explained the difference, he was explaining the difference between masonry and veneers.
Was that in the context of our current code, or was that in the context of proposed language? What
We
you're
were
talking about?
trying to decide if hardy board was a masonry product.
Okay.
And he said it wasn't, and that it's buildings that are built with brick and even the tip-ups hold their value longer because they withstand, age and that sort of thing. Whereas if you build a stick building and put the veneers on it, it doesn't have the value that brick buildings do. At least that's the way I recall the conversation.
No, and then we just need to, if that's the way we're going, then we need to remove the word facade, because that really is what's kind of been the question.
Yeah, it's getting in the way.
Yes. So if that's what the three of us agree on, then we would have you remove facade from that percentage, whichever district you're in, and then go with that it's masonry and not a facade.
I think that's best.
Okay,
What do you?
Ron?
Well, as far as it goes percentage-wise, that's, the city council can still change that, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
And again, if it's a PUD, that can all be negotiable, correct?
Correct.
So,
Okay, all right, I'd go with the 70% masonry.
so with the word facade removed
Yep.
from everything.
What's your, Barb?
And for the commercial, community commercial says 80%. That's fine with you?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
And remove facade.
And then
Got
I'm
that now?
merging, so the two changes I'm gonna have is remove facade, and this is gonna be throughout this draft ordinance, as well as merging classes 2 and 3. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
Great.
Okay. All right. I think then we can move on. We've gotten over the hump, I promise. That should be the longest one. Lighting. So, from the changes from our last meeting and our previous planning commission meeting, I've reverted the language mostly back to what the existing ordinance is. What I was working off of previously was what Ben wrote. So we've kind of reverted it back, and I'm sorry, I should mention, this is on page 19 of your packet. And you can see there, there's just some clarifications on the lighting fixture is not going to exceed an illumination of half a foot candle or 1/2 lumen per square foot. And some clarification between residential and property lines versus non-residential, and making sure we keep low lumen decorative fixtures exempt from this ordinance. So it still does remain 1 foot candle at the right-of-way or non-residential property lines. There's not too much change, so I don't know if there's any immediate questions, or it's just more kind of clarifying from what we had before.
I'll leave the floor to lighting expert.
I'm not a
All right.
lighting expert. I just want to point out too with this, and I remember, Bill, back when we had the whole lighting being looked at, that he came in and he said our code had 2 points of enforcement. There was the cutoff, which is on the fixture, and that means you have down light. So that's one way to enforce the ordinance. The second way is light leaving property, and that's where the lumens come in your 0.5 or your 1 foot candle. So wherever we go here, we have 2 sources. Now, when I was working with Frank with this, because part of the discussion came up with the carriage fixtures on Caribou, and I think also looking at, excuse me, residents. So the low lumen decorative fixtures, and I think when I sent you this, I'm like, do we need to have a definition for what a low lumen fixture is? And I did kind of send one to Frank, but again, I am not a lighting expert. So that can be kind of something, but I think I put like 60 watt or equivalent would be, in my eyes, a low lumen fixture. So I think if we go with this, we still need a definition for what a low lumen fixture is.
Or, excuse me, for decorative
Yes.
fixtures? Okay. So we don't have anything, it doesn't appear there's nothing here for low luminum decorative fixtures.
It just says they're excluded.
Yeah.
They're exempt. So, and that's a city or legal or whoever, but I'm not sure if the city will ever have to be questioned on that, or will it ever come up? I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't bring it up to Dean, but he did review this. He didn't mention anything about needing that clarification, but I don't know if maybe if Megan, you have a different opinion, if there's, should be maybe something added, or.
So sort of to go back to Bill's point with regards to the enforcement mechanisms, I think that with the added clarification for decorative lighting, and so long as the foot candle in turn does not exceed that property line, that's where you're sort of at your strongest authority, number one, and you're also limiting impact. So if the commission is supportive of having the flexibility to have that style of lighting, then I think that the code as revised is sufficient to handle
Okay.
that.
So we're good.
We're good?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Excellent. All right, and then I have basically one more slide. This one is going to be quick. Because basically all this is, from last time, we've mostly agreed on landscaping and fences. The main concern that was brought up at the joint meeting was buildings materials used, specifically steel corrugated fences. So I just added one sentence. It's right there on page 19. Metal corrugated steel fences are prohibited. Otherwise, this language on here is exactly the same as what we went with to the city council last time. So unless someone here really loves metal corrugated steel fences, I don't know how much, if there's too much to discuss.
So does this mean in residential areas too?
This is the one problem about not having the entire code in front of me. I believe that this would also include residential.
Okay, I'm good with that.
I'm with that too, but that fence down by CST,
Which one?
the one that goes by the driveway there, up to the person's house there. What is that?
That's
Corrugated.
corrugated metal.
Okay, yeah. Let's get rid of that. It's terrible looking.
It wasn't supposed to be that,
Yeah, I remember that.
yeah.
How it came to become that, I don't know.
All right. Sounds like we're in agreement
And
on
Frank,
that.
actually, I'm going to retract my previous statement. So I just was taking a look at this language for the lumen standards and now better understand the question, that specifically low lumens are exempted from the lighting standards that would potentially, if you had a lumen decorative lighting, could extend over the space via enforcement, right? So we have the type of lighting, the downcast lighting, that's not what this is ever going to be. So the decorative lighting will always have cast a light outwards, and that light outwards should be restrained within the boundaries of the property. We want that to be consistent across the board. And so for that reason, I would recommend that we have a definition of low lumen decorative fixture included within the code that then just essentially, those will, by its very nature, never extend past the property, and that's what you found in the Caribou Coffee situation. So my apologies, I just wanted to wind that puppy on back.
So you're going to include decorative.
A definition that specifically defines what low lumen decorative lighting is, and I think that lighting standard will just simply set what the lumen count is for those lights. It's fairly standard across commercial building structures that would be wanting to use these types of lights. Same thing would be true in terms of residential streetlights, things like that. And we can be very specific about that language and ensure that we don't have a carve-out that allows for some sort of large bright light that someone otherwise defines as low lumen decorative lighting. So,
Because you have the second factor there too, is you have the bare bulb.
exactly right. Yep, absolutely. And so while they can be lovely and an architectural element, there also is the risk, right, that you could have something that was installed that was defined by a contractor as decorative lighting, but in fact has significant impacts to how the space is lit.
What else we need?
All right, so I'll be adding a definition of low lumen decorative fixture. Correct?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. I think we're done with administrative, so the next and final steps, if sounds like you will make a motion to recommend the draft ordinance, it should say here on the slide. As I put here, any amending parts, we've talked about that. And then from there, the city council can approve, amend, or deny the draft ordinance language. And I'm optimistic about this, though, so.
Sounds good. Somebody want to make a motion, or?
Go ahead, yeah, I'll make the motion to recommend the commercial design standard ordinance draft amendments with the changes of classes, combining class 2 and 3 instead of having the 4 classes, and
Eliminating
Facade.
facade. How could I forget that one? Eliminating facade, and then also coming up with a definition for low lumen decorative fixture.
and we're okay on a 70%, right? We don't have to add that in the motion, no?
No, because we are just removing the facade part.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a second. Any discussion? You have to beat me. Hearing no discussion, we'll take a vote. Chris?
Chris, aye.
Ron, aye.
Barb, aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Frank. We'll go on to item number 6 on the agenda tonight, and it's a discussion, the CI moratorium study, pages A1 through A13. And this is Megan's floor.
Absolutely. So we are, so over the course of the past 3 Planning Commission meetings, we have met to discuss our planning study for the CI district, subject to the broader moratorium that is currently in place. And over the course of the meetings, we have talked about a number of impacts that we are concerned about, that the Planning Commission is concerned about in terms of the overall development of the property. And we have the properties along the CI district. And we have talked about the existing uses, and we have talked about the surrounding residential uses, in particular on the west side of the district. And part of that conversation has been about how do we address the uses that exist today and their CUP status, their ability to expand subject to, council review and approval, and how do we talk about the, the expansion of the district for the future? What uses do you see being viable? What uses do you see being added value to the CI district? And so, one of the things that we certainly have kept in mind from the beginning of our conversations is that this is your commercial industrial core. And so the uses, permitted and conditional, should reflect those 2 goals. We are on an arterial roadway on Lake Drive, so there is the ability to handle truck traffic, but there's also a concern about making sure that truck traffic is not too intense and otherwise changes the character of the overall district within the city. And so in the course of these conversations and talking in particular with regard to non-conforming uses, potentially if you were to rezone the entirety of the district, we developed a 2-district approach. And that 2-district approach took into account the residential character on the west side of the CI district, the west side of Lake Drive, whereas the east side allowed a more traditional, broader commercial industrial use, and then incentivized new types of development through the creation of permitted uses. And so that was sort of the thrust of our conversation. And then we talked a little bit at our last meeting about what performance standards could be implemented to better effectuate the intent and the purpose of this rezoning. So one of the comments that we heard from the members of the public is that having a 2-district approach could really be detrimental to property owners on the west side because the east side uses that are currently permitted, there's significant demand for them in the market, and that not allowing them on the west side would undervalue those properties. And so we talked about one of the strategies that we could utilize for ensuring that there's good value for property owners on the west side is to change some of the setbacks, create more flexibility in terms of your design standards, and also create more flexibility for permitted uses. And so that's my quick 5-minute, 3-minute summary of where we've been. And so what I have presented for you in our packet tonight is a broader and more thoroughly vetted set of performance standards that discusses this 2-district approach. But I think now is a good time for us to discuss about whether the Planning Commission is comfortable with this approach moving forward, and whether sort of separating the CI district into 2 CI districts, an east and a west, is something that the Commission is interested in pursuing. Talking about some of the policy bases, right, about why you would do that. And I'd be happy to sort of, if you have questions about the reasons why that would be an initial recommendation, happy to talk about those, and then happy to talk about alternatives as well.
Well, I know we jumped into this thing with the east and the west and all that, and I guess I'm open if there's other alternatives too, but I don't know what the other alternatives are because I am not a lawyer and I'm not a realtor or whatever, but I know it upset some people when we drew that line or whatever, but I think the main goal that I had is we got to figure out a way. The residential is there, and whatever we can do that'll combine that bumper or whatever. And I know we came to that, well, not a conclusion, but we did say that it maybe one district here, another district there, east and west. But I don't know, what are other options? Then that's where I'm at.
Well, I think we can start from the top. So I think everyone has a picture of your CI district in front of you. And so, you know, you can just see from looking at the zoning map what the issues are, right? You see that on the east side of the district, there are very few parcels that could be developed besides what is within the district now. That rural residential that borders it is zoned rural residential, but it's not rural residential in the context that we see it on the west side. You know, one of the issues that the commission has discussed is the impact of the existing businesses on Lake Drive. So there is truck traffic based upon those uses. At the same time, the commission has talked very positively about sort of some of the building standards that have been utilized for those properties. There are a number of uses on Lake Drive on the east side right now that are legally non-conforming uses, and that's, for example, is Semstone. It was approved by a CUP, but it is now legally non-conforming based upon the revisions that you made in 2021. And so, you know, your starting point is that only those uses that are permitted by your 2021 ordinance are allowed throughout the entirety of the district, and that prohibits uses including that would include, for example, crushing. Those uses are now prohibited as the district stands today. So that's sort of your base level starting point. An increased level of starting point would be to create some nonconformities along both sides of the district, frankly. And those nonconformities, we've talked about sort of what the impacts are of creating a legal nonconforming use. By creating a legal nonconforming use, you restrict the existing operator's ability to expand and otherwise improve their business, and it also can decrease their accessibility to financing, which, while it encourages uses to turn over, that's the policy basis behind it, it also can have the impact of sort of degrading those properties along the way, especially if they are thriving, viable businesses. So that's sort of a consideration to think about. And then the alternative would be to preserve one side. And so here we have our scale, right? We have the scale where we started, which is what you have today, and we know what's prohibited and what's allowed as it stands today. The next step up is the sort of the two-district approach, which would preserve the district as it stands today for much of the east side and create a new west side district that is more amenable to residential uses. And while the new east side district would also encourage more permitted uses of the types that you would like to see. So those types that we'd like to see that we've talked about as a group are industrial parks that have small manufacturing businesses, light industrial manufacturing businesses, limited warehousing, high office uses, office with showroom uses. Those types of uses could be encouraged through a permitted use structure on the east side. So that's sort of your middle ground. And then your broader ground is a rezoning of the entirety of the district that strips away many of the existing uses that are permitted by CUP under the district that lives as of December of 2021 and you know, sort of overlays the more limited district that we've talked about for the west side. And of course, there's levers in between each one of those places. So that's my summary without my chalkboard behind me, but that is how I would summarize your sort of choices in front of you. And I think one of the things that could just be helpful, so we've talked about the types of businesses that you want to see along the district, and we've included definitions within the code. That's a standing point across the board, is that we have added clarity to our existing district to say what do these words mean, and so that's already sort of narrowed the scope slightly. But perhaps it would be helpful to talk more about what your concerns are with how things function today, and what sort of the goals are of this new revised district, or, you know, frankly, to add the definitions and to leave the district as it stands now.
Well, maybe I should retract what I said about the east and the west, but it just seemed to be simple. We use Lake Drive as a simple, let's divide it here. And I don't know. Do you have any ideas, Chris, or I don't want to back up the program, but it just seemed like a simple thing. We got the east and the west.
Megan, you said leaving it the way it is and going by definitions. I think about definitions and companies coming in sometimes and how they try to say they fit in this definition. And that happens all the time, and you would really, really, really have to get good definitions down, in my mind, in order not to have what we just went through happen again. I personally can't see making any existing business along there legal non-conforming. I can't see it. I don't agree with that. So when I look at the map and I look at the one side and with the businesses that are on the east side and what's to their east side, and you have Crossways Lake and really no buildable area and definitely no residents. And then when I look at the west side, I see residents. And we all just went through looking at how a certain business would impact residents. That I do see a clear difference between the two areas. And I know the landowners and that are not happy with looking at a east-west side division there. And what we want is to utilize the land to its most capabilities and make it, especially on the west side, make it, there's this perfect word, harmonious with the residents that live back there and around there. And I don't know another way to do it than to have two separate areas. Because I don't think we can define everything well enough to have one area. I just don't know if we can do it without Elizabeth going through problems.
So another, so one of the things that we have contemplated as part of this ordinance is adopting language permitting expansion of any existing legally non-conforming use by CUP. Now, is that a permitted use that can be expanded through a building permit? No, it's still an extra hurdle. But it does provide an opportunity for any businesses that are rendered non-conforming by a rezoning to come forward and seek City Council and Planning Commission approval for their expansion. Again, that doesn't mitigate the financial impacts that we talked about with regards to legally non-conforming uses and how they can use their business. It does provide a path forward for expansion and for renovation of those sites. So to put that into sort of the consideration mill. Another item that I would raise for consideration is that the city code currently contains specific, so they have their performance standards for the district, but there are also specific performance or use-specific performance standards for uses like dog kennels or wireless towers, mineral extraction, things like that. Seasonal holiday displays is one. So, and as a new member of the Columbus team, I am interested to hear the story about how seasonal holiday displays became a special, specific performance conditional use. But nonetheless, that does provide an opportunity to beef up a definition. So we like, from a legal standpoint, to have a definition be broad and talk about the things that someone will do on the property. We want performance standards to restrict the how of how they would do them. And so another mechanism that could be added to the code that would still create legal nonconformities, and we're not going to get away from that, but would create specific standards with regards to things like contractor shops with contractors' yards. And we've talked about a sort of a bifurcated standard between the contractor yard limited and the contractor yard. The contractor yard is a broader use, allows for bigger trucks, bigger machineries, and significant piles, significant exterior storage, whereas a contractor yard limited would have a narrowly focused use that would be for, that could be, a multi-building complex that has some small equipment, that has trucks utilized for, electric, plumbing, other service shop, and, or a landscaper, things like that, with like sort of small piles of mulch and things along those lines. So another mechanism of regulation, right? So aside from sort of the double district approach with different types of uses, is really specific performance standards for the uses that exist within your code today. That combine with your definitions does not change the issues created by the legally nonconforming use, however.
So this is Chris selling the company or passing it on to a kid, and that was something that came up. With it being legal non-conforming, it can create problems for financing.
It can create problems for financing, absolutely.
So Megan, if, just to clarify though, if you have a conditional use permit today, you're able to operate under that conditional use permit. No ordinance change is going to change that. However, if and I don't remember what umbrella you had it under, the one that said big trucks, piles and such, if you eliminate big piles and trucks and stuff by performance standards, does that change? So how is it that, how are you able to do that? Because I think, from what I heard from the council was they didn't want any more businesses with a lot more heavy equipment and trucking and big piles. So whether it's east or west, how is that eliminated while preserving some of the rights of the existing businesses? And I know that's probably, I don't know, you know what I mean?
No, I mean,
how to get there, but
I think you've highlighted that there is an inconsistency. So the adding performance standards does not change the creation of the legal nonconformity. It just changes the sort of scope of the revisions to your code. It adds a section talking about the how of, how you want the new definition. It's all a rezoning. It limits the expansion of those existing businesses that do have large piles, that do have, sort of more intense trucking uses. But it allows you to sort of stay within the structures of the code as it stands today, and then adding a performance standard that more closely defines what those uses will be going forward. But again, does not address the legal nonconformities.
Excuse me, Megan, can you define somehow that the companies that are in existence now can stay the way they are, but that we don't want to introduce any more heavy industry? I mean, that we're getting it from all around, from Blaine, from Wyoming, from Lino. And I don't think we want to be that. We don't want to be the little city where everybody else sends their undesirable, their Lulus, they call them, largely of businesses that other communities don't want. And that seems to be what we're getting.
When you think about your developable property as it exists today, and those things that have not been developed over the course of the last 20 years, there are pretty few parcels on your east side that remain to be developed for those broader uses that would be market appropriate for your large construction firms with those more high-intensity industrial uses. It would require sort of the aggregation of a number of residential parcels to make that work. So you have sort of, so the east-west approach allows for the flexibility for existing businesses to expand, to change generations, receive financing, while most of the development along Lake Drive is, in terms of the available property, is on your west side. And then the west side approach as currently drafted does shut down accessibility to all of those more intense uses. It is just simply a less intense district. And it's one of the reasons why, so from a purely planning perspective, you put together districts to encompass different purposes and different uses. The West District is drafted to focus future development on office showroom, a light industrial, non-impactful residential uses that require some of those more extensive buildings, right? Your brick, your tilt-up panel buildings that house both commercial and light industrial uses. Your East District preserves the space for a number of, so preserves the expansion rights of those uses that are currently permitted, and there are a number of them underneath the existing code as it stands today. And it also has sort of a natural limitation on the future expansion of businesses because of the amount of developable property. But it is absolutely within this commission's policy realm to say we are going to create nonconformities, and and that those nonconformities will exist, but that we will hear them via a conditional use permit application for them to expand their business, to get building permits, things like that. So you're just creating an additional hurdle for those existing businesses that are fairly new to the city, if that makes sense, that are sort of thriving and still growing.
So, Megan, I just have, not to throw another wrench in, but just curiosity. When we did the freeway district, we split it up in quadrants. So if we looked at the CI district and we said 141st is the middle, which it is, then we said from Potomac to 141st on the west side is the district. And then the remaining district is whatever you would like it to be. You would have majority of them not, you know what I mean, and put some limitations, you know what I mean, some limitations, maybe some higher design standards or whatever it is, performance standards you want to put in, but allow uses to a certain extent. You would catch most of them.
Elizabeth, can you draw it for your visually inclined assistant city attorney?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
If we're thinking outside the box, we're
Right.
going to think all the way outside
That's
the box.
okay.
So, that's another approach that absolutely is viable. And what I will also say in terms of existing property owners is that the West District, we call it whatever we want, CI Light, does increase flexibility for those property owners. It reduces setbacks. It adds value in that way. And it also increases sort of how those properties can be outlined. And I actually have a slide, Elizabeth, if you'll pop over, let's see, let's go 3 or 4 in, I think.
So what I was saying, so from Potomac to 141st, this would be a different district. And then everything else up to 141st would be that other district. And we don't have to call it east or west, we can call it whatever A and B, 1 and 2. East and west didn't have that hierarchy kind of thing, but CI 1, CI 2, CI A, B, it doesn't, you know.
Excuse me, and then each district would have its own performance
Could be
standards?
2 districts?
2 districts.
Really, you're just taking the bulk of our heavy and making that its own, kind of like the horse racing or asphalt, right?
Correct.
Just about. I mean, same thing with the light industrial.
Yep.
Yeah. But understanding that this district is I believe, trying to think the land use plan. Doesn't this have a land use plan of commercial?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
The land use plan on the comp plan, isn't it the same,
It is.
Yeah, it matches up.
but it's commercial, right?
Commercial, it's the one highlighted in purple, correct? That's commercial industrial, I think, in the land use plan.
It is commercial, it's red.
Yeah, I can,
I don't have the land use plan in front of me, that's what I was asking.
Excuse me, so then if you did this, it would have to go through a rezoning process? No?
We're doing the same thing if we were doing east and west, right?
Correct.
Yeah. This
You're
is,
just,
you know what I mean? I was like, okay, where are the quarters? You know, 141st is approximately the middle. So I was just saying, okay, if you use 141st, you would, you know, you would quarter it. Because I will say that, you know, here you've got a lot of residential. You got a lot of, backing up to this, you got a lot of residential, even down here.
And so that's, I think, why, you know, sort of a look at the map matters. You know, I think the real question for this, that's in front of this commission, is that I think I've heard everyone say that ensuring that there's further protections within the district for those residential property owners is a priority. And so the question is whether also retaining the legal use rights of a number of existing businesses along the other side, or the east side of the district in that northern, northeast corridor, is also a priority.
it is to me.
Yeah, it is for me, too. I think that's a great idea to split it up like that. Because I think from 141st and up, it's a little lighter, isn't it, Elizabeth? It's not heavy.
So 141st, so looking at 141st,
We got CST across the street, kind of.
so here you have, starting with Century Fence, then you have Foresight Contracting, North Pine Aggregates in here, Semstone, and then, and as you go down. But once you hit 141st and you go south, it changes, you know what I mean? You have your less intense contractor shops, you have
Where's Dave?
Waldock's, you know what I mean, all of those sorts of things, Century, or landscaping. I think there's even, there's one trucking facility here, but they have all the garage condos. I mean, you know what I mean, there isn't nearly as many of those heavy truck type of businesses. Really, it's in this upper quadrant where you have your North Pine, Foresight Contracting, Dave's High Pro, Semstone. It just so happens that's where City View Electric is, although I don't classify that the same. But it just happens to be that's where they lie in that quadrant.
And Elizabeth, in terms of the developable property within that quadrant, is that the majority of that already developed and under use?
You know, there's a couple of houses in there. I want to say there's 3 or 4 properties with houses. And the one larger vacant property, I know what he wants to build. And it's not a trucking facility. It's a trucking facility, but it's more of a repair for refrigerated trucks. And he's been saving up for years for that. But Otherwise, you know what I mean, otherwise they're in that, you know what I mean, kind of in that area.
And so as you'll recall, when we talked about the more intense district, we were thoughtful to preserve the existing uses so as to not create nonconformities, except of course for those that are already legally nonconforming. Semstone is a legally nonconforming use and has restricted expansion rights and all of those things. But we're also thoughtful to not allow for flexibility for significant increases or expansions of uses that are not similar to what is already there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Where do we go with this, though?
Well, so let's talk a little bit about, let's sort of get into the details of the, of what I have very tentatively, of course, titled this West District. And what uses are, so a very significant policy conversation that is important for this commission to weigh in on is the distinction between permitted and conditional uses. And so we've talked about this a little bit, but I think it bears further conversation. Listing a use as conditional rather than permitted has an economic impact in terms of the how a building, a use is attracted to a piece of property. And, you know, conditional uses at the same time grant the Planning Commission and City Council broad authority to attach specific performance standards based upon factual evidence that's contained in the public record regarding the application. And so historically, the City of Columbus has utilized conditional uses as a regulatory mechanism, especially within non-sewer districts. And what we have submitted to you for consideration is additional permitted uses, but I would really like to hear more from the Planning Commission about whether or not they would be comfortable with that approach. The permitted uses that we have discussed for what I will call the less intense district are offices with no exterior storage, office showrooms with no outdoor storage. So these are like your granite manufacturers would be your office showroom example. And then limited production and processing with no outdoor storage. The example I'll give for this limited production and processing would be like a furniture manufacturer or something along those lines. These are less intense uses that, you know, we've talked about how these uses are of particular interest to the city in terms of their the jobs that they bring, and sort of the less intense use of just a truck. You come, you pick up your truck, and then you go out for the day. These are uses that have people in the buildings working during the course of the day. And so we listed them as permitted uses. However, that means that, you know, the city then is reduced to simply their building permit standards or any other performance standards that are contained within the code. And so I think that bears further conversation and weigh in by this body about whether that would be a policy consideration that you are comfortable with.
Megan, the one thing that I want to add in here, because we talked about this before, is looking at houses currently in the district that new landowners want to convert to a commercial use, and what the criteria is going to be. What's the criteria going to be for that? Because I think that will bear some conversation. And so whether that is a site plan review, or it comes before the council, it has to have another step. I don't think it's fair for someone to say, I'm going to convert the house, and now it's an office, and I'm going to use the driveway, and I don't have to do anything else but put a shingle out. Meanwhile, the guy to the north has got to do a landscape plan, and he has to do a paved parking lot, and he can't use the house, you know, he can't use house standards to put employees in an office. You know, so I think there's an inequity here that isn't fair. And then, of course, then they use all the residential buildings to house their equipment. Meanwhile, everyone else has to build buildings to a commercial standard ventilation, wind load, snow load, and all that other kind of stuff. I just don't think it's fair. So somewhere we have to, because we've heard now from a couple of property owners that that's what they want to do, but I think we have to build in somewhere that that is just not a site plan review, because I think I will have a battle if I start to saying them, no, 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 you have to have a paved parking lot. No, 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 you have to do all of this other performance standard stuff. So I just want to bear in mind that somewhere in the back, somewhere we have to plug that in, because there are a number of houses in this district that that's what they want to do.
Well, the sort of simplest solution to that is to retain them as conditional uses and utilize the traditional CUP process, so that as they would transition to a commercial use, there'd be a change of use, and that change of use would trigger a CUP review.
And I'm okay with that. And, you know, if it says, H says new offices or newly built offices or something that language, but if you're converting a house, you're going to go in the other bucket.
Yeah.
And I don't know how the planning commission feels. That's just my recommendation.
No, I agree.
Yeah, that's logical. Otherwise, like you say, you're just going to have a shack sitting there with somebody with a shingle out and saying, I do tattoos or I do something. It's just a house.
Yep.
Barb, do you have anything?
Kind of a complicated one, because we know of people that are, planning on doing that.
But you can word that, Megan, so that that would be covered, like Elizabeth brings up, new as far as the permitted. And I'm not sure if under the the conditional use area, if there's something you would add, but
Well, one very simple add-on is to say any property that's converted from a previously permitted use it requires a CUP.
okay.
So to sort of fully flesh this out, a person buys a piece of property, they come in, they say they want to do an office building. They're going to do traditional office, with, or even, let's say it's sort of like day-in offices. So people like a Regis or a company like that. And people would come and they would use their offices for a period of time, single small offices built out. That type of application would not come before this commission. It would not come before the city council. It would come to the planning staff and to the building inspector for review of the site plan and compliance with the performance standards of the district. What are your thoughts and concerns and considerations about that? It's going to have to, it's going to be septic, so it's going to have to be able to comply with the septic standards. So, I mean, there are sort of those technical aspects will be covered by that review process. But there would not be, and they would have to comply with whether it's a facade or a masonry building, all of those things. But there would not be an opportunity for sort of conversation and for public input. So thinking about that, in that very scenario, is this commission still comfortable with utilizing a permitted use as a sort of an economic development tool? Or is it more comfortable with saying permitted uses, or we're going to stick with the existing permitted uses and come in on everything for a conditional use permit?
I know Bill was very persistent in trying to get, when we were looking at the freeway district, to get permitted uses, and it was decided no, other than what government agencies or the ones you have to have, because the city wanted to be able to make sure that a process was there to make sure all the i's were dotted and the t's were crossed and it fit in the area. And I see that area as one way, and this area is a different way. I'm not sure. I go back and forth. I understand having permitted uses makes it more easy for contractors or developers to come in because it's an easier process. And I think that's important. We just want to make sure that we're keeping it so that, you know, even with the existing homes being converted, that the standards are adhered to, that the driveways, the traffic, that whatever else would impact the area would be looked at. So, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I remember Bill also, when he brought that up about, I don't know, it sticks in your head. It seemed like he didn't have a control. It's like, we say we allow a gas station, so gas stations just come in, and I'm a gas station, I fill that role, where before, I don't know, that's a different area though than
It
the
is.
freeway district, so it's kind of, I don't want to say it's hashed over, you know, you just got to kind of fit and plug things in compared to the freeway district. We got kind of fresh start to start saying what the future's going to look like. So you're dealt a deck of cards, and this is the way we go. I don't know, do you have anything about that, Barb, about permitted use? Or?
Well, if we go over what they're suggesting, of course, agricultural, daycare,
And I should just say that uses A through G on page 5 of the memo are existing permitted uses within the district as a whole. Those are standard. Those already exist today.
right, so then you're just adding offices with no storage, office showrooms with no storage, and limited production and processing with no outdoor storage.
Nothing that's high impact.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you have a problem with that?
Not really.
Permitted uses?
I don't.
No.
I don't see nothing. Of course, something may come in and you go, wow, I didn't think that was coming.
Well, and so maybe sort of in the context of this conversation, it's important to talk about what those definitions are. So the office showroom is a facility in which handling of information or the performing of administrative services is conducted as a principal use, including services provided to persons both on-site and off-site on a walk-in or appointment basis. Up to 25% of the gross floor area of the structure may be used for display of merchandise and equipment, and its sale to a customer where delivery of purchased merchandise is made directly to the ultimate consumer from a warehouse. And so, you know, this is sort of like your tile showroom, something along those lines, where people come in, paint store, you come in, you pick the things out, and then ultimately the larger product is delivered by your contractor at another point in time. The other, this limited production processing includes light manufacturing, fabrication, assembling, processing, packaging, research, development, or similar principal or primary uses which are predominantly conducted indoors and which would not be incompatible with other office, retail, and service uses that may be in the same building or complex. Limited production and processing does not include industrial processing from raw materials. And we would find that last sentence, that limited production and processing does not include industrial processing from raw materials, to be substantive here, because those are your more high-intensity industrial uses that have noise, sound, or sorry, noise and sound, same thing, noise and odor issues that are typically associated with them.
Excuse me, Megan, so this is Barb. So if, with these permitted uses, it would free up the landowner to have more opportunities, is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you agree with that, guys?
I do. Especially in that area. I think part of what we were talking about is giving them the flexibility and giving them a little more so that they could market their property, and same with setbacks and everything else we were looking at. So,
What do you think?
I agree. I think you're right. I mean, that's the way I would go. got to open it up, or, yeah,
And reduce the process.
right.
And with that in mind, what we also have done for the less intense district is added a broader range of uses that are incorporated within our definitions that are specifically targeted toward lower impact uses. And that includes so the permitted use that we've just discussed has the requirement that it can't, that it's consistent with sort of being next to a regular retail or office space. But what we've included in the CUP section of potential uses is our low-impact, high-technology manufacturing, which is a nice fit for this district, as well as broader manufacturing and wholesale establishment, warehousing, and storage facility uses. Along with our recreational facility commercial, which is another sort of opportunity that we're seeing pop up in very similar cities. So your vertical endeavors, things along those lines. All of those are conditional uses that have been added to this district to create more use flexibility overall.
Okay, and the permitted uses would be more compatible with the residential area?
Correct, so recognizing the attempt is to strike a balance between the city's historical process of being restricted with regards to commercial uses, incentivizing those uses that we think have very limited impact on a neighboring residential, number one, and can be built out subject to performance standards that clearly define how the building is built, and that can be essentially managed administratively through the building permit process, whereas the CUP uses are expanded with new uses that the city has not permitted, but that also are similar in the sense that they have lower impact to residential properties, but would be reviewed through your traditional and formal CUP process.
And so the landowners would feel that they have more opportunities?
That's the goal, correct. Now, on page 7, this is sort of the new information that we've put together in consideration of this meeting. And so these are the more specific performance standards. These performance standards, as compared to what you have now, are significantly more restrictive. They have a higher level of building exterior materials. And they also have a much higher, I shouldn't say much higher, they have a more restrictive consideration of display and screening standards. And so whereas your existing district has this language that talks about what landscaping must include and the sort of, and the foundation plan is it must be included, the revised standards incorporate more specific requirements in terms of how screening can be satisfied that is more consistent actually with your light industrial district, which is a considerably sort of more restrictive in its nature than the CI district was originally. It does create some consistency for staff in terms of utilizing similar language between those two districts. And Elizabeth, there's a slide up above this one. I think a couple more up. Yes, I'll explain this. If we go up one more, and then one more before that. Part of the conversation that we had at our last meeting was talking about loosening the setbacks and the for this sort of less intense district that we had tentatively called the West Side District. So currently within the CI district, the front yard setback is 75 feet, and the rear yard setback is 35 feet. And so what you have here, the blue is your lot. The gray is what the district standards were. And the yellow is what the district standards would be under what is proposed now. So you do have further use of the property. And then we talked a little bit about, okay, what's the difference? Within this table, we have a density category, and we questioned each other, what is this density for? Because that typically deals with residential properties. It's for those existing residential uses that have to be a minimum of 5 acres. So I've removed that for the point of clarity here. But what we also talked about was the impact of floor area ratio and lot coverage. And floor area, so I included within your packet sort of a definition of what those two things mean and how they are utilized within the code. So again, your floor area ratio is if you have multiple stories, that's all your floor area is, all of the things. Your lot coverage is just what the footprint of the building on the lot. And so that's why we have different standards for those two metrics. And so I wanted to show you what we have proposed, and with our next slide so this would be an example of the revised performance standards that would allow additional lot coverage because we would have more usable space based upon reducing the setbacks, both at the rear yard as well as the front yard setback. And then the green boxes is about 50% lot coverage. If you think about this as a long lot, you could fit 3 buildings in those 3 green areas with parking and storage in between. So that is how, this is my very, very rudimentary site plan for how a potential long lot could be utilized.
I was looking at that bar there.
Elizabeth really likes my site plan.
This would not pass muster at the front desk, okay?
This is probably.
You know, Megan, when you looked at that FAR, the floor area ratio, does that take into consideration like septic systems and all that on the footprint?
No, it does not. So, and that's where the lot coverage comes into account. And there is not a single district within the city of Columbus that has a higher FAR or a higher lot coverage than what we're proposing for this district. So this is consistent with your city code,
Okay.
citywide. And so for that reason, we wouldn't make a shift because we do recognize that we could say, oh, well, you can have this lot coverage except for the fact that it's unsewered. So practically, it doesn't make sense to recommend that.
Thank you.
And so so that's what's proposed to create additional flexibility for this less intense district in consideration that these are less intense uses while preserving the majority of the existing uses, sort of within this L shape that we've discussed tonight. And then your East District, which begins on page 9, really retains the characteristics of your existing district, but it adds those uses that we've discussed as being potentially viable within the district itself. Now, you will see, and you will notice on page 10, that we have again recommended a slew of additional permitted uses. Now, again, if we think about this sort of L-shaped district, there are very few of parcels within this area that are not already subject to an active use. But at the same time, some of the conversations that we've previously had would be the interest of the city in attracting sort of low-impact, high-technology manufacturing, because again, this would be a district that does not have residential impacts, that wouldn't have sort of like the noise and the odor impacts of potentially those types of uses. We would potentially recommend them for inclusion as additional permitted uses which within this broader, more intense district, as well as then incorporating a broader list of uses within this district as well, including your catering businesses, some of those that do have a higher traffic impact. And happy to discuss sort of the, to talk about what those uses would be in particular, and also, and sort of to go through those definitions, and why they're included on that list of permitted uses, and also happy to take feedback, remove them, any of those things.
Megan, so the ones that you've underlined are the ones that you're adding?
That's correct. And it is certainly a policy question for further discussion about whether the manufacturing light use would be appropriate without further review from the Planning Commission and City Council. That manufacturing light use is a pretty extensive definition. It's on page 3.
Yeah, I was just reading that.
Yeah, but it does, I mean, there's certainly, while we think this is a good definition, that clearly outlines, you know, what's contemplated, there certainly are impacts from some of the work that would be done in these facilities.
Yeah, I would think, me personally, I would like to see that one removed.
Yep. And similarly, you know, so we have included on this low impact, high technology manufacturing because it doesn't have, similarly, you know, sort of as we recommended in the less intense district, these are uses that do not have the odors, the smoke, the dust, the noise, the vibration, and other factors along the way. But include the manufacture or assembly of computer components and medical devices. Now, I should say, I think it's important that many of that manufacturing process often involves significant amounts of water uses. And so I think that would be an aspirational goal looking towards a sewer district as compared to probably a use that's today. But again, there are ways to make that work.
Yes. Costs money, but it can work.
So I know this is a lot of information. I know it's very dense, but most of it. So I think another sort of point of clarity that's helpful is that these uses have been suggested by your existing code. They've been sort of at the tendrils of what has been contemplated by the existing ordinance. What we're doing is trying to add some meat to the definition so that it's very clear for staff when someone comes in and seeks a CUP or seeks a building permit, which box things fall into. And that really was the goal of outlining those definitions as the first sort of starting point for this process.
I'm trying to figure out where we're going now.
So if I may, I will summarize much of what I have heard from this commission this evening. I heard that there is significant concern about creating legal nonconformities.
Correct.
And for that reason, the commission recommends crafting a district that would take into account the significant residential properties that exist along the west side of Lake Drive, while also limiting the future expansion of less intense uses on south of Potomac up and until the mixed use, the MUL district, thereby preserving the more intense uses that exist within your existing CI district as crafted in December of 2021 that still has significant restrictions on crushing operations and things of that nature to live within the northeast quadrant of your existing CI district.
Yeah.
Yep.
Furthermore, the commission is making a general recommendation that there are very limited permitted uses that can be added to the list of permitted uses subject to performance standards, and that no conversion of existing uses, including existing residential uses, to a commercial use may be processed as a permitted use. Those must come through a conditional use permit process to allow for further city review and ensuring compliance with building design, appropriate parking, things of that nature.
Correct.
That's right.
And then for the more intense district, you would add a number of permitted uses to the list of permitted uses within the existing district, but those uses would be limited only to offices without exterior storage, office showrooms, artisan shops, and limited production processing. So again, mirroring what would be allowed in the less intense district, not allowing light manufacturing as a permitted use because of the potential impacts on surrounding properties and the need for further city oversight. Meanwhile, the commission would also be supportive of the more restrictive performance standards on the less intense district, including significant screening standards that would be required. And similarly, the commission would be supportive of reduced setbacks, both for front yard and rear setbacks in that less intense district.
Correct.
That's right.
I have one last question for this commission. And it's a complicated question, so prepare yourselves. One of the conversations that we have had about the Contractor's Yard Limited is the storage of exterior materials. An example came to mind about whether a landscape contractor operating out of a building like City View Electric, whether the commission would be open to storage of landscaping materials like mulch, dirt, if those, I'll say, piles were significantly restricted. So they would have to be stored behind an existing building. The machinery used to manage the piles would be limited to your less intense machinery, or whether the commission is not interested in having any exterior material storage within this less intense district.
Well, we already do. I mean, we have landscape company down there with mulch and rock and that. Right?
We do, but again, these are the kind of things that you have to kind of take into consideration. So we just want to make it clear what's the limit, because we want it, you know what I mean, we want it more restrictive. So because we know the questions that we've been people have been asking us, and so these are the kind of questions they ask. Well, what can I have outside? What's the limit?
I'm sure we're talking about Welch's down there, right?
Yeah.
And look
So-
at that, most of that's just all outside storage.
And there's no building. So, I think ultimately, throughout these districts, we've required buildings since,
Primarily, but you don't, in this particular case, every time you store something in the backyard, the residents have to look at it. You know what I mean? The backyard is where the residents are. So we either have significant screening requirements, which I think we did, which is the 90% opacity. But understand, you put it in the back, they're going to have to spend some money to screen it. And it has to be existing screening. And that was the one of the issues that I had with waiting 2 or 3 years for existing screenage to grow. That's going to be tough. Because for 2 or 3 years, people are going to have to look at it until the trees grow or the screenings grow if you allow that flexibility.
Another alternative is that if exterior storage of piles that cannot be seen from, the right-of-way or the residential property could be in a side yard, only if it's adjacent to another commercial industrial property, something that cities do from time to time. So, you would have my very poorly drawn site plan where you would have your 3 buildings, and then you would have sort of storage containers along the side. Storage containers meaning, sort of your cement block screen where you would put your materials. A landscaping contractor could potentially put their materials. But again, that is as currently drafted. I have included in the draft memo that was provided to the commission in anticipation of this meeting, we did include the flexibility for those small piles. However, as the definitions that we have drafted specifically exclude any exterior material storage from the contractor yard limited, and that is the only permitted use within your CI less intense district.
Even in your freeway district, you allowed outdoor storage of finished materials, but you did it by percentage.
And so certainly this approach is not the final approach. We can take feedback from the Planning Commission about, very significantly restricting that use. But as I was thinking about some of the properties that you've pointed us to as being sort of successful industrial parks that have a number of uses where you have people utilizing office space and also having truck storage and then also having trailer storage, many of those uses do include some exterior storage for like a landscaping contractor. Now those are very different than, sort of large industrial piles, but I thought it was important that we have the conversation as we're crafting these standards to see whether or not that is a use that you think would be appropriate within the district, or whether exterior storage of unfinished raw materials should be prohibited throughout.
Did we have that on Street Smart?
Street Smart has street signage,
Yeah, they don't have raw materials.
but they do not have raw materials.
All that is just equipment back there.
Yeah.
Finished equipment, or, yeah.
It's a tough one. Unless it goes by, again, about the size of the lot. If you can have a configuration of, if you got 1.5 acres, you can't have 1 acre of storage in a half-acre house or whatever, I don't know. You're looking up in the air there, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of like where, you know what I mean, what's out there now. Like, yeah, I was trying to think of what's, you know what I mean, what's on the east side, other, you know what I mean, yes, you have the one landscaping. There's a couple of contractor shops, you know what I mean, excavation companies, you know, that will have materials. You know, Blake Will Drilling, I can't remember, or Blake Drilling, I can't remember what they store outside.
It's like pipe in that, isn't it?
Is it, you know what I mean, so is that considered finished product and not piles? Because I can't think of anything else other, you know what I mean, on the east side. And on the west side, you know what I mean, you do have, and I don't think there's high piles, but there's what I would say, grass clippings, because you have a landscaper, you know what I mean, you have landscaping on the other side.
Certainly something that we can do is bring back to you sort of varying levels of language that say, you know, so this is your sort of broader language that would allow these types of uses. Here's your picture. This is what this gets you. Okay, here's, you know, sort of turning the dial downward. This is where these performance standards would get you. And then, of course, we have the flat, no, you cannot have these piles. And perhaps by looking at the images, that would be determinative to you in whether or not it would be appropriate for the district.
Well, with Lake Drilling, they arranged their buildings on their property where they automatically, with their buildings, have screened whatever they're having, you know.
And well, and so, you know, what's unique about all of this work is sort of when you push at one edge, it comes out the other. And so, you know, what we're trying to do is create more flexibility for these less intense uses. And in doing so, we're backing them up to those residential properties. And so the buildings may successfully screen from the roadway. And so, you know, a potential option would be to say that they have to be screened from both the roadway and the residential property. And so if you take a look, if we go back to my really horrible site plan, in this diagram, where you have, those are your three buildings, you could potentially have screening in those yellow areas. And that would be a mechanism to keep your screening from not being seen by the right-of-way, which would be along the right edge of this property or along the front, or along the right edge of this property, and then also would not impact your rear residential property owners.
Now, on something like that, would you recommend some kind of fencing at the rear so that if there was residential?
Yep, so as it stands, so as we have it currently drafted, we would have outdoor displays of approved finished product for direct retail sale or lease, accessory to the principal use, are not subject to the screening requirements. But otherwise, with the exception of those retail merchandise like vehicles or things like that for sale, raw materials must be screened from both the adjacent residential properties and the public roadways. Screening at a height to effectively limit the public view of the outdoor storage area would be located entirely within the required setbacks. Required screening would be at least 95% opaque throughout the year, and can be satisfied by a berm, a decorative fence with the finished side out, a decorative masonry wall, a hedge or other vegetative planting that are planted at least 3 feet in height and grow to the required height within the 2 years of installation. And then required screening could be reduced by the city council at its discretion if the applicant could demonstrate that from the public view from an adjacent residential property was otherwise limited by wetlands or permanent natural features. Another alternative that we have seen and is constructed in a number of locations around the city is the construction of a lean-to or accessory structure simply for the purpose of screening, so long as they meet the structure setback and other replacement rules. And that under no circumstances can outdoor storage of raw materials ever exceed the height of the screening. And all of that must be part of the land use application. and cannot be in any of the maneuvering areas, so.
I think that about covers it.
I think that approach does allow you to have some of the uses that are sort of your small shop uses without, while further eliminating sort of the negative impacts of like a large pile or something like that.
No, I agree.
Are you okay with that, Barb?
Yeah.
And then lastly, our final recommendation is to include the code amendment that permits expansion of non-conforming uses by CUP. We think that's a good mechanism to cover any property where, you know, our attempt has been to limit the impact of, you know, to not create those legal non-conforming uses. To the extent that they are created, this does provide a narrow window for approval, albeit with those sort of other issues that we are trying to avoid. And that is, of course, subject to the full discretion of the City Council and the Planning Commission in their review of the CUP process. And it includes performance standards to ensure that the expansion meets the standards of the district. So it's not, you know, an add-on or a growth that's outside of what's expected otherwise, that the appearance is compatible with the adjacent property. And after the expansion will not result in increased noise, vibration, glare, dust, or smoke, or be detrimental to the existing character of development, or endanger the public health, safety, and welfare. And also, of course, must be consistent with a comprehensive plan. And that approach is utilized by cities that have built-out industrial areas where they have limited the sort of accessibility to those more intense uses, but are again trying to preserve the underlying value of some uses that they've created as non-conforming to allow for some improvement.
Oh, that sounds good.
Good.
So with that in mind, our next meeting is a joint meeting with the City Council to talk about the proposals contained within this. At that point in time, the City Council, subject to its review and consideration of the draft ordinance, may order a public hearing. And the goal would be to have this before you for a public hearing, and then ultimately the City Council before the end of the year.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Perfect.
Any other questions?
No,
Thank you, Megan.
thanks, Megan.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
Take a drink of water. We'll go on to item number 7 on the agenda tonight, and that's a public open forum. Is there anybody that'd like to get up and make a statement or two? Mr. Waldock. Just state your name.
John Waldock, 6755 Pine Street in Columbus. It looks like a lot of work went into everything we're doing here, and it sounds good. I'd be a little careful when we're selling 40 acres and we're going to tell them they can't store anything. I like the screening, and that all makes sense, but to eliminate storage is impossible. You know, many businesses have stuff. They can put most of it in the buildings, and, you know, depending on who we're selling to, because now we're remarketing who we're selling to. So it's almost going to be impossible to eliminate outside storage. Now, you know, you mentioned piles out by the road. You know, we're in agreement with that, but to have a building and a parking lot and some stuff, you know, you can't put every trailer inside the building, or we'd have 40 acres of a building. So I would assess that and think hard about that and look at different things. You know, that's really mostly what I got out of but I can see there's a lot into it. So I think that That's probably the biggest concern, because everybody has stuff. You know, how they put it is gonna be the
I understand.
discussion.
I understand that, John. It's
Okay.
tough, you
Yeah.
know, and each piece of property is so different.
Right.
But thank you. Appreciate it. Is there anybody else that'd like to get up and say something? Anybody online or on Zoom? Hearing nobody coming forth, we'll go on to item number 8, I'm sorry, Information Planning Commission report. Chris, do you have anything?
I have nothing.
Barb?
I have nothing.
And I have nothing. We'll go on to line number 9, Information Associate Planners Report. Frank, you have anything?
I have nothing at this time.
Thank you, Frank. A reminder on item number 10, attendance at City Council on November 9th, 2022 is Barb. Gonna be able to make it, Barb?
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you. And item number 11 is a motion for adjournment. Anybody like to make that motion?
This is Chris. I'll make the motion to adjourn.
And I'll second it. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll take a vote.
Chris, aye.
Ron, aye.
Barb, aye.
Barb, aye. Meeting will end. Thank you very much, everybody, at 8:51.